Welcome to Whiskey Cast, Cask Strength Conversation, featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 929 for February 27th, 2022. Coming up in a few minutes.
There's a wonderful story here. There's a wonderful experience for people to take home, and hopefully by default they just become ambassadors for what we're trying to achieve here in Speyside.
The Spirit of Speyside Festival is hoping for a return to normal at the end of April after being canceled entirely 2 years ago because of the pandemic and being postponed last year until a scaled-down autumn event. Tickets for this year's events will go on sale next Monday. George McNeil is the festival's new chairman. We'll discuss that return to normal coming up on Whiskey Cast in depth. That's just ahead, along with the What I'm Tasting This Week department, your voice, behind the label, and...
There was a point when we finished Rossi that I might not have said that I would do a second one. I think, it's very exciting to be able to design another distillery from scratch again. It's really, really exciting.
The news is next on this week's Whiskey Cast.
Durer's brand ambassador, Gabriel Cardarella again. Let's talk about some of the oldest whiskeys in our range of premium scotch. Durer's 18 year is one of my favorites. A sipping whiskey with a long, sweet finish, a must-try. Durer's 25 year is the oldest and rarest whiskey in our permanent range. It's finished and double-aged in the finest Oloroso sherry casks from our Royal Bracla single malt distillery.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast. Trying to fit the best of Ireland into one day, huh? Good luck. Takes us at least 12 years. Happy St. Patrick's Day from Redbreast, proud sponsor of Whiskey Cast.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. With Russia's invasion of Ukraine this week, there have been calls on social media to use whiskey as an economic weapon and stop exports of whiskey to Russia. The thing is, whiskey exports to Russia have been limited for many years because of previous economic sanctions against Moscow. However, exports of Scotch whiskey did start to rise last year, according to figures released earlier this month by the Scotch Whisky Association. Russia cracked the top 10 markets by export volume, with the equivalent of 42 million bottles imported during 2021. That's up 40% over 2020. However, Russia is not a major export market for bourbon and other American whiskeys. Data from the Distilled Spirits Council for the first 9 months of last year shows that exports fell by 46% from 2020. As for calls to boycott Russian whiskeys, well, there aren't that many whiskeys exported from Russia to boycott. We'll cover that later in our Behind the Label segment. On that note, it is worth pointing out that while the Kentucky Owl Bourbon brand is owned by the Stoli Group, owner Yuri Scheffler has been fighting his own battle with the Russian government for almost 20 years over the rights to the Stolichnaya vodka brand name. He acquired the brand after the fall of the Soviet Union, but Russian officials have claimed for years that that deal was illegal and that a state-owned company still owns the Stolichnaya brand. By the way, Scheffler left Russia after Vladimir Putin came to power. He now lives in Luxembourg. There could be some additional fallout from the war in Ukraine. Ukraine is one of the world's largest barley producers, and analysts are warning that the war is likely to affect shipments of Ukrainian barley. While that's expected to have its biggest impact on beer brewers, it could lead to price hikes for European barley that could affect distillers in Scotland, Ireland, and elsewhere around Europe. Last time around, I mentioned the plans for the first new distillery to be built in Campbeltown in more than a century. R&B Distillers has started the preliminary work on what will eventually become the Macrehannisch Distillery on Durer Farm near Campbeltown. It's a former dairy farm, but R&B co-founder Alistair Day says it's right in the middle of what is becoming a fast-growing area of Campbeltown.
So there's 2 golf courses on the dunes. The lovely beach at Macrehannisch, big long sandy beach, and then the dunes, and then you've got the 2 golf course. And there's actually plans to build a hotel at the Macrehannisch Distillery golf course. So I think it's very exciting. I think there's lots of things that will be happening in Campbeltown in the next few years.
Day says a preliminary planning application has already received favorable feedback from the Argyll and Bute Council. A formal planning application will come later this year, with hopes of starting construction in the second half of next year. R&B built the Isle of Raasay distillery from the ground up over the last decade, and Day told me they've learned some lessons from that project that will help with Macrehannisch.
One of the things that we're going to do differently is the visitor centre. So in Raasay we had a visitor centre that we did at the same time and opened shortly after we started distilling. So I think in Macrehannisch we're going to focus on production, getting the distillery up and running, and then maybe 2 or 3 years later phase in the visitor centre. So I think that's definitely something that we've learned from Raasay, because people really want to come when you've got whiskey available.
The new distillery will also take advantage of new advances in sustainability since Raasay opened. Plans are to minimize fossil fuel use as much as possible, and that includes building a malting floor on site. Since the farm will be producing all of the grain for the distillery, malting on site eliminates the need for hauling grain to and from a commercial maltings. Meanwhile, there are plans now for yet another distillery on Islay. The backers of the Illy Distillery have filed an initial planning application of their own with Argyll and Bute Council. They want to build a carbon-neutral distillery on the Girach farm near Port Charlotte. Preliminary plans call for the distillery to be drum-shaped, resembling the historic round church in Bowmore. According to the Scotsman, the project will include a community benefit fund to share in the distillery's profits once it becomes operational. One correction to make from the last episode, I mentioned the new bourbon experience in Louisville, Kentucky, that's being opened by the owners of Hillerich and Bradsby, the company that makes Louisville Slugger baseball bats. I called the experience Bourbon and Billets, but it is actually barrels and billets, stemming from the Hillerich family's start making whiskey barrels before switching over to baseball bats. Sorry for the mistake. Finally, we lost a friend on Friday. Jason Craig wasn't just the global brand director for Highland Park, but he was a good friend and a strong supporter of Whiskey Cast over the years. Jason passed away after a year-long battle with cancer at the age of 51. Please join me in sending our condolences to his entire family and his many friends throughout the whiskey industry. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com and on our social media feeds. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from Whiskey Cast.
If you missed Friday night's Happy Hour live webcast with Dr. Don Livermore of the Hiram Walker Distillery, the on-demand replay is available now at the Whiskey Cast YouTube channel, and we'll have the podcast version out later this week. Join us every Friday night at 5 p.m. New York time on the YouTube channel, our Facebook page, Twitter, and Twitch, as some of the leading names in the whiskey world join me for a dram and a chat. Time now for the Whiskey Cast calendar of events. It's brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling. The Fife Whiskey Festival is this coming weekend in Cooper, Scotland, along with Whiskey Birmingham in England and the Roma Whiskey Festival in Italy. Tickets are still available for Whiskey and Barrel Night in New York City on March 10th, and the Scotch Malt Whiskey Society kicks off a week-long tour of members-only tastings with Charlie McLean on the 14th in New York City. It'll be followed by stops in Washington, D.C., Waco, Texas at Balcones Distilling, Seattle, and Los Angeles. The Malmo Beer and Whiskey Festival is the weekend of March 18th and 19th in Malmo, Sweden. And the Whiskey Festival Noord-Nederland is the following weekend in Groningen, the Netherlands, along with the Hong Kong Whiskey Festival in Hong Kong. Finally, the Miami Whiskey Mash is April 2nd in Florida, followed by Whiskey and Barrel Night in Tampa on April 7th, and the rescheduled Whiskey Global in Vancouver, British Columbia, April 8th and 9th. Remember, all in-person events are still subject to change on short notice, and you will probably have to show proof of vaccination or a recent negative COVID test in order to attend. The calendar of events is brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling, makers of the Virginia Rye Whiskey. You'll find their Roundstone Rye at fine whiskey shops in 26 U.S. states and 3 continents, and online too. Visit the new buyvirginiarye.com site for more details, and please drink responsibly.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
So, in Spain, they call Redbreast Petit Roco. It's me, but a touch more exotic. Kind of like a Redbreast PX edition. Finished in Pedro Jimenez casks, adding a velvety and decadent dimension. You know, I won't lie. A climate like this makes me wish I was a migratory bird.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast In Depth is brought to you by Mortlock and the Classic Malts lineup. Tickets go on sale next Monday for this year's Spirit of Speyside Festival at the end of April, and festival organizers are hoping for no drama this year. 2 years ago, the festival was canceled because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and last year's festival was postponed from April until a scaled-down event in November. Now, with the world starting to open up once again, the Spirit of Speyside Festival is a sign that things may be starting to return to something approximating normal. George McNeil is the festival's new volunteer chairman, taking over this year from longtime chairman James Campbell. I spent some time with George on a Zoom call the other day to talk about plans for this year's event. So you've got to be excited about this because this is the first real Spirit of Speyside Festival in 2 years, right?
I don't think that the word. I think you can be forgiven. Get the word excitement mixed up a little bit with nervousness a little bit as well. But to be engaging with the audience, to be engaging with the industry again, getting a feel for how many events are going to be going on, the amount of people internationally who are talking about visiting Speyside again because the event is here. We've actually seen a lot of interaction back in November when we had the kind of smaller event, which was just about getting us back into the mood again. It was great to see people interacting then, but the fact that we are only February, March, April, about 8, maybe 9 weeks away from a kick-off of the actual event after 2 years of not being able to do it, especially with the unfortunate back in 2020 when it probably, I think it ceased with only about 4 or 5 weeks before we actually had the event. And then obviously 2021 carried on. But in 2022, things are looking so encouraging that we're certainly coming out of a kind of challenging time, getting into a better place. And getting very excited that we're seeing things starting to happen again and we're starting to see people enthused again about this. It's going to be fantastic to get the industry and the general public and the tourism all back together again.
But you are going to have some changes, obviously, because of COVID. There's still going to have to be some health restrictions in place, right?
Correct. We've got to be realistic. There'll be elements of nervousness out there a little bit, which I think is understandable. I believe in 2019 we got to the region of 750 events. I think we'll probably see closer to about 400 events this time round, just as people maybe open up a little bit slower, which I can understand. There certainly will still be enough in the 400 events to drive the footfall that we're requiring, to bring the economic growth to the area that we're hoping for, and really help to put Speyside again just further on the map. But I think you can understand a little bit of apprehension from some places. In the industry that I work in myself, in my day job, we do tours around a working mill factory, and we too have kind of cut the size of those tours down, just so when those bottlenecks in certain areas, you're still taking people's health and safety into consideration, which I think is important. So it's wise that we still do that. But listen, delighted at the amount of places that are opening the doors again, when again you could appreciate if some weren't going to do that. So yeah, I think it's great to see some people fighting down the kind of barriers that are put up there and finding a solution to make sure that we can welcome our guests along.
When will you start selling tickets and unveil the schedule for this year?
So the unveiling of the schedule is taking place. We actually have a press launch event on the 3rd of March, which is taking place, we believe, at the Craigellachie Hotel. We'll have some of the great press coming over. We'll have some of our partners as well talking about what's happening. So that will be a pre-launch on the 3rd, and then it will be launched to the press and for previews on the 4th. And then on the 7th of March, it will be go live. And yeah, we expect, after, as I say, November, when we went live in November, we've seen an incredible amount of activity, ticket sales, participation from the general audience. So we expect to see maybe even a wee bit more of a kind of bottleneck of people kind of trying to get in at early days, I think, with this one, because with with 400 events, but versus the 700, we know we can peak back in 2019. As we get back to that level, hopefully for next year, I can see a bit of, there might be a little bit of a cry out for more tickets as people kind of come online on that date. But very exciting time come March. We're seeing a lot of our partners upload a lot of the activities. It's wonderful to see some of the activities that are coming on board, some new activities that are coming on board this year as well, some new events. So yeah, a lot happening in that space, and it's exciting times, Mark.
What are some of those new events?
Oh, there's interest. Well, I see there is one that's new. It's a bit of a birthday. I think it's worth recognising. Up at the Aberlour Distillery, when they're actually celebrating 25 years of their Abuna. So there's one or two. They've got their master distiller there, Graham, along with Chris, the archivist, and also Carlos, their brand ambassador. So three of them actually entertaining their guests with that wonderful kind of whiskey. It's great to see the Diageo group, such as the Dufftown Distillery, Rosario Distillery, the Linkwood Distillery, and the Mothlogs Distillery. They're opening their doors again. They don't actually open to the public. So it's great that events like these people are actually getting to see behind the scenes at what doesn't actually always open to the public, which is wonderful. There's an exciting one happening at the Downs Hotel, which is very interesting, where they're actually pairing whiskey and linking it to Star Wars. So this really is starting to think a little bit different. And I wish I could tell you more about it, but it's very... it's actually the challenge for the guests when they're on site and they're tasting the whiskey to link the location of where that whiskey is being located or where it's being paired with as a location in a Star Wars movie. So we don't have the answers. All we do is have the kind of appetite that's getting wet for that, which is excellent. Another couple of distilleries, such as the Tamdhu Distillery and Tamervillen Distillery, also again opening to the audience, or opening to the public when it doesn't normally open, which is excellent. I find this is interesting as well, the Glenmurray chapter and verse, where actually the Elgin Cathedral is going to be used as a location. So they're taking people outside, and Visit Scotland, who is part of our kind of tourism organisation that kind of does the umbrella for Scotland. This year they've called the Year of Storytelling. Now, there's nobody more better than storytelling than the whisky industry, with some of the history that's there and some of the stories that are given to some of these wonderful whiskies. So yeah, it's wonderful to see that there'll be a bit of storytelling about the cathedral, and then linking that and pairing that with some whiskies when you're outside in that kind of years old kind of location. And if the weather's just on your side to get it right, I can see that being something very special. Then over at the Craigellachie Hotel again, where we've got the press event, we actually have the history of the highball with Sarah Burgess. Sarah Burgess is their new Quaich Distillers creative director. Sarah's been in the industry a number of years, so it'll be quite exciting that she's also going to talk about the history of the highball, which is that wonderful cocktail that I'm sure one or two of us have tried as well, Mark. So yeah, listen, I'm pulling probably 7 or 8 examples out of a page that could have about, I think, 300 or 400 here at the moment. So, and that's they're still uploading. We've still got another 2.5 weeks of uploads still come along. So fingers crossed we get to that magical 400 or 500 events.
And some of these events are actually free. Most of them are actually free, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of events that are free. That's you've got a mixture of paid and free events, but there's there'll be something for all budgets. I think that's worth recognising. There's a lot of people locally that like to try some different things as well and get into the distilleries they're not in, as well as international tourism. But some things come with a premium simply because of the whisky they're tasting, the expertise they're getting advised on. So yes, so there's a spectrum of all those events through there. And it's wonderful to see some of the time you get. I mean, one of the things, Mark, since I've been involved in this kind of, I wouldn't say the industry, but since I've been involved in the Spirit of Speyside Whisky Festival, one of the things that attracted me to it was the people and how wonderful the people are. The stories, the history of the whisky is fantastic, but it's all brought to life by people and the experiences I've had within the whisky industry, and some of the experience I've been blessed to have at some of the distilleries. And it's the people that drive it. And when you see some of these people who put their time up, we do a whisky school, the actual whisky festivals run a whisky school. And that's actually done through volunteers of people who's maybe retired, who have been in the industry for a number of years, and they just want to pass on their knowledge. They want to share that with people because they know there's a wonderful story here. There's a wonderful experience for people to take home, and hopefully by default they just become ambassadors for what we're trying to achieve here in Speyside. That brings more tourism to the area and hopefully more recognition and awareness of what's happening out there. So when we're in wonderful locations stateside like yourself, and I see an array of whiskies behind you, I'm sure there's some magical Speysides just in the background there. It's wonderful that we can just share that message so far and wide. And that's the wonderful thing, I think, with people that give their time and give those free events just so they can keep passing that message on and just sharing that knowledge to a wider audience, or to a new audience as well, I think.
Give me a sense of the economic impact this festival has on the Speyside community. I know it was created years ago as a way to drive the tourist season a little bit earlier than usual, than during the summer. But this is really one of the big drivers for the tourist season, right?
Yeah, I think I've read a comment, well, it will have to be justified, but I've read a comment when somebody wrote, arguably the biggest whisky festival in the world. And I think if you measure that in economic impact, I think it certainly has got that influence or that effect. Now, the last time we measured the impact to the Whisky Festival was back in 2013, I think it was, and we believe it was in the realms of 2.2 million it brought into the economy. And that's back in 2013. So if you then go back to 2019, where they had more than double the amount of events, so effectively you could quite comfortably, and if you think inflation within that, I think you could quite comfortably put a £5 million number on that. And that's each year, obviously. So, and again, the industry that I'm in, which isn't sitting in the whisky industry, but where my day job is, we see significant footfall growth in the tourism sector coming to the location I'm in. So we know that it helps with hotels, we know that it helps with accommodations, smaller accommodations, as well as the wider impact to tourism, as well as food and drink outside of the whisky space. So, yeah, the confirmed number was 2 million back in 2013, but if it starts with a 5 now, Mark, I wouldn't be surprised. It's an exercise we have to look at, to be honest, just to get that number back again. And we need to engage after this one to see where that impact is, because it's quite significant. And then that actually influences how you look at it for the future and how you start to say, so if 2019 we peaked at 750 events, if there was so many events for that period of time, 5 or 6 days, and it's peaking up, maybe there's something we can do that just allows another couple of days either side of the dates, and that allows accommodation to spread over a longer period. When you're up at the 750 events, it's a lot to ask in a short period of time for a lot of people. So again, you could just manage your resource a lot better. So I think there's things we can do that will continually grow the opportunity within the Whisky Festival to get bigger, hopefully. And who knows where that may well go. We'll engage with the stakeholders, we'll engage with the members, we'll engage with the audiences, we'll engage with the accommodation and ask those questions going forward. But hopefully this is something that can continue to grow, and I believe the whisky industry would be behind that, fully behind that as well.
I know there was one festival several years ago that I believe was the 10th anniversary where they ran 2 full weeks. Could you see going to 2 full weeks at some point?
Listen, you would never say never. And I remember that 2 full weeks. I had the pleasure. I remember that period of time. We actually had a concert, again, at the Craigellachie location, I think it was. And I remember the flyover with the RAF flying over as well to kick off that concert. It was a wonderful experience. And there was a lot of elements of the kind of bodies of government bodies getting involved at that time. There was Event Scotland, who looked at bringing music into the event. And that's where I think that extension came from, because it was funding to say, let's measure that. What I wonder on reflection, when I reflect with our team now and where we are as a board. There was a 2-week event then, and it very quickly went back to where it was. And I just wonder what elements we could have taken forward to start that growth. However, I think the economics of those 750 peak is certainly something that we need to just look at that will influence it growing. So, yeah, listen, if Edinburgh can run a festival over 4 weeks and they're when they're doing their comedy festival and their book festivals of the world, then there's no reason why Speyside couldn't do a whisky festival over a longer period of time as well. There's infrastructures out there with content that make it work. And if it's what the industry want and we engage with them, if it's what the guests want, if it's what the tourism want when they come to Speyside, then who are we not to deliver?
Any idea what the international attendance is going to be this year, or is it really too soon to say?
It's a great question. I don't know is the answer. We know there's inquiries coming from international. It's great to see that government legislation is starting to ease a little bit when it comes to the travelling of guests. It's great to see that fully vaccinated may be able to travel in and out without any need for testing. Hopefully, as we get closer to March and April, that even slackens a little bit more. I see Scotland relaxed some guidelines just recently in the last few days, which is great to see for youth travelling around Europe for what is the half term coming up for school. So I think, I think the reason that we're seeing probably about 400 events is a little bit of nervousness for the industry, which I appreciate and respect and understand. And you'll maybe have that little bit of nervousness of travellers coming back as confidence has to return a little bit. So I don't think we'll see the kind of peak that we've experienced in 2019 of international tourism. Hard to put a number on it, but I still believe we will be pleasantly surprised at the amount of people who think, now's the time to travel again, and I certainly want to enjoy that whisky festival once again, or experience it for the first time. I guess a very small but good indication is that some of the whisky school that we've managed to sell places for, some of that is international tourism. People who were on a waiting list for 2023, some people have opted not to travel for 2022. We've contacted the 2023 kind of festival waiting list, and 1 or 2 people are engaging now. So that encourages that we're seeing a little bit of footfall, or that interest certainly coming back. So yeah, hopefully I can answer that question much better when we possibly talk after the event. And I hope I'm waxing lyrical with the volume of international tourism that returns, especially from your wonderful stateside location as well, where I know there's 1 or 2 guests that we'll be engaging with as well. So we'll look forward to welcoming as many as possible over the coming months.
The Spirit of Speyside Festival is scheduled for April 27th through May 2nd all over the Speyside region of Scotland. There's a link to the festival's website in the show notes for this episode at whiskycast.com. That's Whiskycast in depth. It's brought to you by Mortlach, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlach lineup at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. With St. Patrick's Day coming up, there are a lot of new Irish whiskies hitting the market. Let's start with the Cuvee single malt from Waterford Distillery. Unlike the single farm versions of Waterford, this one blends malts from 25 different Irish farms where Waterford sources its barley from. It's bottled at 50% ABV. The nose is slightly dusty and dry with touches of honey, vanilla, straw, and fresh berries. The taste is malty and vibrant with fresh berries and barley sugar at first, followed by a burst of citrusy tartness and a hint of spice that fade to reveal touches of dried fruits, honey, and vanilla for a nice complex flavor. The finish is long and subtle with that same dry dustiness from the nose and touches of fruit and vanilla pods. I'm scoring Waterford's The Cuvée a 94. Friday, Glendalough Distillery unveiled its latest Mizunoria cask-finished Irish single malt. This one is 7 years old and spent 4 months in a combination of new and used Mizunoria casks. It's bottled at 46% ABV, and the nose has a good balance of tropical fruits and flowers, along with touches of mango, pineapple, coconut, and sandalwood. The taste starts off fruity, followed by a burst of cinnamon and incense, along with dark chocolate, a nice maltiness, and touches of candied oranges, sandalwood, and almond oil. The finish is very long with lingering hints of spices, crystallized ginger, and dark chocolate. I'm scoring the Glendalough Single Malt Mizunoria Cask finish a 94. More tasting notes in just a minute, but first, our tasting notes are brought to you by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey. They're reviving the tradition of Maryland-style rye at their Baltimore farm and waterfront distillery. And they're offering WhiskyCast listeners a free virtual guided tasting. When you buy a bottle at your local retailer, a Sagamore Spirit teammate will guide you through it. Visit sagamorespirit.com and use the code word WhiskyCast, all one word, to access. Please drink responsibly. There are 2 new whiskies from Egan's and the Egan family in Ireland. Let's start with the 10-year-old Conviction. It's a blend of single-grain and pot-still whiskies finished in XO cognac casks and bottled at 46% ABV. The nose is dusty and dry with touches of dried apricots, a nice maltiness, honey, and vanilla. The taste has notes of oranges, almond oil, ginger, dark chocolate, and dried fruits, while the finish is long and fruity with a touch of ginger. I'm scoring Egan's Conviction 10-year-old Irish whiskey a 93. The Egans have also released the 4th and final whiskey in their Legacy Reserve series. Volume 4 is finished in Moscatel de Valencia wine casks and bottled at 46% ABV. The nose has notes of baked oranges, marzipan, apricots, honey, and hints of tropical fruits. The taste is sweet and fruity, nectar thick with subtle spices, apricots, and honeycomb. The finish is long and fruity with just a hint of spice. I'm scoring Egan's Legacy Reserve Volume 4 a 94. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of nearly 3,300 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com.
If it's chocolate you're craving this Valentine's Day, then look no further than Duer's 18 and Duer's 25-year aged marks. Indulgent, yeah, but you are totally worth it. This Scotch whiskey's unique tasting experience is one of the world's most popular and awarded whiskeys. Our flagship award winner, Duer's 18-year-old, is everyday luxury, a superbly crafted whiskey. The signature 25-year-old is something very special. Comprised of fine and rare Scotch whiskies from the Duer's inventory and aged in hand-selected casks for at least a quarter century, it's for those looking to push the boat out and celebrate milestones, and to have an approachable luxury whiskey in their home, office, or whiskey cabinet that they can pour for those dearest and nearest when the time is right. Whatever type of whiskey you enjoy, these two will have you asking for seconds.
Let's open up the inbox now for Your Voice, presented by Scarabus Isla Single Malt Scotch Whiskey. One of the comments on whether to stop exports of whiskey to Russia came from @BogStandardDram on Twitter this weekend. Quoting now, "It's either sacrificing a lot of money now or a lot of blood and even more money later. But this simple math gets lost in the height of various business dealing with tasty Russian petrodollars." Now, if you've ever wondered what distillers listen to while they're working, well, sometimes they listen to WhiskyCast. Here's a YouTube comment from Clay Van Antwerp of Michigan's Journeyman Distillery, who was listening to our virtual tasting webcast earlier this month with James Hinchcliffe, Alexander Rossi, Marco Andretti, and Tim Durham from the IndyCar world. Here's his comment. "So here I am, listening to this podcast while I'm working as a distiller at Journeyman. Imagine my excitement when James mentions he'd love to visit Journeyman. It certainly made my day. Stop by anytime, guys." Thanks for the comment, Clay. Alex Chisholm posted this YouTube comment on our Happy Hour live webcast Friday night with Dr. Don Livermore. "Big fan of Dr. Don and his whiskey. Very much enjoyed this. Thanks for this to you both." We also had this comment from Greg Butler in California, following last week's webcast with Lance Winters and Dave Smith of St. George Spirits. "So, after watching this webcast, and not even knowing that St. George Spirits existed here in California, I ran out and bought their single malt to correct that oversight," with a smiling emoji. Greg also shared a photo of his bottle of St. George's Baller single malt. Clearly a baller move. If you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook at WhiskyCast, or just email us. The address is comments@whiskycast.com. Your Voice is presented by Scarabus, the unique Islay single malt forged by the whiskey-making traditions of 3 generations of the Lang family. Look for it in the U.S. at your local Total Wine and More store and specialist whiskey shops worldwide. Find out more at hunterlang.com. Let's wrap up the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and other things that make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. I mentioned Russia's imports of whiskey during the news, but what about the domestic stuff? Yes, while Russia is known primarily for vodka, there are a few whiskeys being made in Russia. Praskovieski whiskey comes from the Praskovia winery near Stavropol and comes in 3, 5, and 6-year-old versions. However, it's not widely exported. There's also the Ibex whiskey that comes in blends, malt, and grain versions, along with the Black Corsair blend for exports. And there are also some domestic blends that might be found in European export markets, sold under labels like Grand General's, Royal Guard, and even a 6-year-old malt sold under the Glen Eagles brand. Wonder if the Scotch Whisky Association has heard about that one. If you have something you'd like to see us look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copperpot. The tears of Ireland's great writers, bursting with flavour, humour and angst. Bottled for you to taste. No writers were harmed in the making of this premium Irish whiskey. Writer's Tears Copperpot.
That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and of course a complete archive of all of our past episodes all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address, comments@whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
A thoughtful gift is hard work. What you need is a go-to multi-purpose gift for all occasions. A bottle of Redbreast can say, "Enjoy every minute, they grow up so fast." Oh. And equally nails, "Apologies for the back pain, I should have just hired a moving company."
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Duer's 18 and Duer's 25-year are must-try, must-add bottles to any whiskey bar collection. The care that goes into these 2 bottles is first class. Keep an eye out for them at your local liquor store. These 2, I know you'll enjoy.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2022, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.